So, welcome everyone. I am your moderator tonight. My name is Dr. Faye Allard. If I come forward, can you all hear me? Okay, excellent. So, I'm a sociologist, and sociologists love a bit of culture. It's what we thrive off of. We think that culture makes people who they are. So what better way to think about who we are than to think about the food we eat? So if we think about all the things that are special to you, and that what makes us who we are and our identity, I think food is a big part of that, isn't it? So you might have guessed from the accent that I'm not Philadelphian. Anyone want to guess where I might be from?
Australia. It does sound very Australian when you said it.
So you must be from New Zealand.
Other hemisphere.
London.
London. I'm from London. So I'm from London, England. But a lot of people from London, England went to Australia, so they caught my accent. So that's but I think about England, yeah, and I think about the identity that we have with our food. And I am quite willing to say that the stereotype about British cooking, I'm okay with that. It's not known for its cuisine, but it's also part of who I am. So I just brought along a couple of things that make me think of home. So what would a British person be without their tea? So think about what the little things that we choose to drink, that first drink that you get in the morning, and what that says about you and your identity. And then how that becomes part of you. So a lot of people I know identify me with my tea drinking, yeah? And maybe it's a big stereotype, but for me it's true. I love my tea. I've got tea bags everywhere, stashed just in case. Then the other thing that I think about, when I think about identity, and I think about what makes me authentically British. Anyone ever heard of this?
Yep.
Anyone tried it? Anybody like it? Yeah, you're my friend. So Marmite is an incredibly British product. It's basically yeast that's kind of made into a paste. It's very salty, very tart, but it really is that thing that I think about when I think about home, yeah? About who I am, how my identity is tied up with the food that maybe I offer people who come to my house, but also which make my family and my national traditions what they are. Because culture is our family. Culture is our community traditions, our national traditions, and even now maybe our global traditions. And I'm sure we're going to hear from the panelists later on a little bit about how the world is getting a bit smaller, isn't it, in terms of that. Now I don't want to talk for too long because I know we're running a bit behind. But I had some questions for you, because I think you're more interested than I am. So here are some of my questions. So, how does food connect with what home means to you? You know, I want to think about what's home and food to you. Maybe some dishes, maybe some things that you really love.
Sure.
Yeah, at the back there.
So my mother family came from Hungary, so I make chicken paprikash.
Very nice. So that kind of connects you to your family heritage. Now, is it a family recipe that's been passed down?
I can make it without any recipe.
That to me says that it's something that's part of your family, yeah, and that probably if you have children, your children know.
I used to watch. I watched my aunt. She was my godmother. She would make it, and my other aunt, my aunts would make it. So I could just do it from the side.
Very good. So that's part of who you are. Anyone else? Has anyone else got a dish like that? A dish that makes their home what there is. They've learned something. Yes.
Well, something that I worry about with African American young people today wasn't so much what we cooked, but how we helped prep food. You know, the greens came in, you had to tear them, get them ready, you know, all that. So you were part of, you know, you were like the really important part of making sure they got cooked. So you learned how to, you know, take care of getting them ready. You know, and then that really puts you really in touch with, to me, really in touch with.
So it's not just the eating.
Right.
It's the preparation.
It's the preparation,
well,
the bugs, the dirt, you know, all that kind of stuff. So you were more connected to it. It felt like that.
And do you feel that that's something that's
subsided?
Lost,
very lost. If they're eating it all, it's in a can or in a bag, and yeah, that part is. And the kids on the floor with, you know, that connection. That's more gone, and that's what I'd like to see come back.
Anyone else want to share a recipe? Yes.
That was brilliant, by the way, because it's totally true. But we don't cook really. Well, we cook significantly less as a society, less than ever before in history. Even simple things like shelling beans or shucking corn.
Yep, that's
It's
right.
like something that
It was a
no one
kid's
does.
job.
Plus,
That's right. Yeah.
But in my family, meatballs,
Oh, yes.
Italian, never had any meat in them. That was just like a thing that we never did because of a cost thing. Having meat is expensive. A good meatball anyway is half bread, but ours are all bread. And at this point, I'd much rather have an all bread meatball than a meatball.
Interesting. So that's not
Wow.
It's
just
good to me.
Wow.
that's not just a tradition. That's your own family's adaptation to your social surroundings and economics. That's become your own, and now something you prefer. Very interesting. Okay, next question. Have you ever used food to build bridges with other people?
Hi.
Yeah, that-
Oh, sorry.
So yeah.
Yes.
So how have you done that?
We host international students for the English language program at the University of Delaware.
Nice.
And fortunately, they want American food. They want to experience America when they come. So I don't have to cook outside of my comfort. So, you know, American
What
tacos.
does American food mean to you?
Well,
When you
they're
think
not,
American
I've
food-
learned that what we eat are not tacos. They're American tacos, because we just put everything on. You know, we've had some folks from Mexico, and they're like, these are not tacos. You know,
Okay.
you shove everything you can. Baked beans with a little bit of the ground coffee. And
Hamburgers are to
Hamburgers
Japanese people what they
That's-
think of as American food.
that's
Interesting.
sure.
Spaghetti.
Spaghetti is
Ah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let's come here.
Excuse me, I've had the experience of working in a kitchen where there's tons of international students from all over the world, and during a staff meal, the students or the staff would rotate into position, and you got to see dozens of ethnicities of what what food meant to them, and it really came out during staff meal.
Really interesting. So did it vary a lot?
Oh, every 2 months, 2 different people took over the responsibility, so it changed every 2 months.
That sounds like a pretty sweet deal. I wish I was eating that.
So I lived overseas for 5 years, and the way that I connected was when I lived in Mumbai, I took actually street food tours. And so some of my best friends have become food bloggers, and that's just how we kind of connect, you know, to people. And as I go to each country I'd lived in, that was like always my first way into the culture, was try to have some kind of food-related experience so I could connect
Right,
it.
so for you, that was building those bridges
Building.
where maybe there weren't bridges.
Right.
Interesting. Anyone else want to think about how they might have used food to build bridges? Yes, let's come over here.
In the industry that I'm in, where you're constantly I did today, you take people out for lunch and dinner and drinks, and it's building client bridges and building relationships, and
Interesting.
it's huge. I mean, that's what we do.
Interesting. So it's not just families, it's not just cultures or communities, it's the way we operate our businesses too. Fascinating. You had your hand up.
I
Tim.
was going to say the same thing, that, you know, being in the business world, the United States is very big on doing business over meals, and that it's considered a way to make a bridge with either a, you know, person you want to get in good with, or a competitor or whatever. You know, it's always used as the bridge and the bribe. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay. Let's flip it. Have you ever experienced a time when food has alienated you or someone that you're eating with? Maybe a meatball that wasn't quite meaty enough. Or something like that. Can anyone think of a time where they felt a little bit uncomfortable eating something, or felt that the people that were with them were uncomfortable? Yes.
I already spoke, but one
Oh,
time
it's
we
quite okay.
I took our family to a Filipino bread house.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what it's called? And they were all young, and we were like, let's try this. It's an adventure. And wow. What was it called? Tripe?
Yeah.
I mean,
Huh.
we had.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
We just had never experienced that before.
So tripe is pizza intestines.
Stomach.
Oh, it's not.
That was something that you couldn't quite get your head around. Interesting, because that's exactly what we were talking about earlier before the event. We were talking about Angie's experience in Scotland. Now, do you want to just quickly recap, because it's such a good story?
Oh, well, I grew up in Malaysia, but we were sharing about how I studied in Scotland. I graduated from Edinburgh. And of course they asked me, so you had haggis? I'm like, yes, I absolutely love haggis. And that's basically a mash of everything in the sheep's intestines. Anything that you can find in the sheep, inside the sheep, stuffed into its own stomach, spiced and baked. And to me that sounds absolutely delicious because I grew up with Chinese ethnicity, and of course we eat everything that moves. So that's
And then as a British person, we have some strange things that we might eat that kind of go into the offal world a little bit, but intestines isn't really something that's quite often we see. So I understand that kind of, okay, I'm not sure what I would do with this, how I eat this, how I prepare it. So yeah, I guess it could feel a bit uncomfortable if you're not familiar with that. Has anyone else got a story about how it might have alienated someone? Yes?
Yeah, so I grew up in Jordan, but my family is from the US. And so I started going to a Jordanian school in 4th grade. And within like the first 3 months, I started packing my own lunches instead of having my parents pack them because I wanted to copy the food that my peers were eating. I didn't want to be the one person with peanut butter and jelly because everyone else thought that was weird.
Interesting. So you actually assimilated by packing your own.
Even though I didn't like the food. I was like, Mom, I really like hummus. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, even though I didn't like it.
So who knew food could be used as a trade to kind of get in with a group? Yes.
That's funny. So I've lived in Trinidad and Tobago for the last 10 years, just recently moved back to the States. And my son, when we first moved there, he was 4, and I would pack his lunch and I would make all these foods that were unfamiliar to his classmates. And so the kids, I think within the first couple of weeks, started calling him Couscous Boy. Couscous all the time because it was something he enjoyed until we moved there. And he was like, Mom, please, no more couscous. Couscous Boy.
Who knew couscous could be the big divider? But then what this tells me is that food could be an invite, and could be something warm and connecting. But food could also be used to make us different and separate, yeah. So thinking about this a bit more, I'm going to skip this. Let's think about the great city of Philadelphia, which is now my adopted home. And I think about all the different neighborhoods and all the different restaurants that appear in the neighborhoods. And I think about how this gives us a knowledge of the city, gives us experiences with other cultures, yeah? And that this might be a way for us to get to know other cultures in a way that perhaps otherwise we wouldn't. And in a way that I think most of us are comfortable with. It might be hard to find someone to talk to from a certain background, but food is a proxy, isn't it? Food is a proxy to doing it. So thinking about this a bit more, got a few more questions before we're going to break into our different sessions. So, do you associate certain areas of the city with certain cuisines? So how have you learned this? I'm also just doing this because I want to find out where you're all eating and I'm going to go there. So, what do you think? What areas of the city do you visit to go and get cuisine from a certain place? Yes?
I think one of the nicest things about Philadelphia is they have those street fairs.
Yeah.
And so I'm new to the city, and when those come up online, suddenly I know where the African food in the neighborhood is and everything. And so in this city, like you were showing that map, we are able to assimilate into what's going on with the food culture.
Okay, so you've used it as a way to kind of orientate yourself around the city. Interesting. Yes?
It seems to have a lot to do with the segregation of the city, though. So,
Yep.
like, Port Richmond is Polish. South Philadelphia now is like a mix between mostly Vietnamese, but also Italian and Mexican. West Philadelphia is Afro.
Yep, absolutely.
Caribbean, but is that necessarily a good thing, then, that you're going to different neighborhoods for different?
Well, for me, at least as a sociologist, my area of expertise is thinking about segregation in the city, thinking about ethnic enclaves and where people settle.
Somerton are pretty Russian now,
Yep.
although there's some other.
Absolutely. And that there's been some interesting movements in the city in terms of people and where they're moving to and from. The city is a living, breathing organism, isn't it? It's always changing. And as we're seeing new influxes of immigrants, we're actually seeing new developments in the city. So for me, what's interesting is that generally speaking, what happens when immigrants arrive in a country, you tend to go to a neighborhood where there are other people like you, initially, because it makes it easy. So I know even as a British person, when I got here, who was I friends with? British people. And the one question, where do you get your bread? Where do you get your bread? The bread is horrible. Where's the bread? And everyone was like, I make my own. I'm like, oh dear. So what happens is you initially, newer immigrants cluster together, and as they assimilate, as they get used to the city, as they make connections, get work, get job, they spread out a bit. But what we see initially, especially with newer immigrants, so we're seeing a large Cambodian immigration, Vietnamese, like you said. So newer immigrants come, we see clusters. So that can really be an interesting part of this story. That food, depending on how you look at it, it could be a place that is segregated or part of the process of assimilation. So it's proxy for a lot of other things, but I really like your answer. All right, so any other places in the city that we associate with a certain cuisine or anywhere?
Well, Chinatown right off the top is obvious because they named it,
Which is interesting. So we have Chinatown here. In New York, of course, they have K-Town, Koreatown, and other places as well. So it's to do with the number of immigrants and where they settle. Let's try this one. How does the term melting pot, very apropos term today, relate to the experience of cooking in the US? So this idea of people being around, yes?
I think it's much more acceptable for chefs and restaurants to display menus that have samples from a lot of different ethnicities without it feeling hodgepodge or weird or out of place, because there's so many different ethnicities have immersed themselves here and there, and it's less, the lines are more blurred now, so it's easier and more acceptable.
So in restaurants we do see maybe a mixture of different cuisines and things now in a way.
Without calling it fusion. It's not
fusion. Yeah, very good. So this might be, again, a reflection of American society if we think that everyone gets a crack at the whip of kind of bringing their culture to the table and thinking about how this might work. All right. Philadelphia is an increasingly ethnically and racially diverse city. We're very blessed in that sense. We have lots of different groups here. They might not be integrated together, we might be quite separate in terms of where we live, but certainly we are a very diverse city. So in terms of that diversity, how has that affected the kind of cuisine that you've consumed? Anyone found I'm still looking for restaurant recommendations. anyone got any particular restaurants that they've stumbled upon that they would never try otherwise? Anyone can think of anywhere? Everyone wants to know now. No pressure. Yes.
So I went to undergrad at Penn, and I tried, I think, a lot of new foods there that I hadn't experienced when I lived in Jordan, but some of that was Ethiopian food. I had never tried that before. So there are quite a few good Ethiopian places in West Philly. And Abyssinia is a good one.
Yeah, that one. The big spongy kind of
bread. Yeah.
I think bread is really interesting as well. I'm sure our panelists who know far more about food than I do, they talk about some things like that later on. So we've got Ethiopian, being exposed to that. Anyone else? Yes?
Indonesian, and I decided I hate hard-boiled eggs as a kid, and they put hard-boiled eggs in everything, so I know I don't like Indonesian.
Okay, but I don't know very much about that cuisine, but I wonder if anyone can speak to that. Anyone else? Yes.
One thing I find interesting, it seems that areas that are gentrifying seem to attract a variety of ethnic cuisines, so people that are perhaps higher income want that variety. I'm thinking of the Fairmount area of Philadelphia in particular, and Fairmount Avenue, there are lots of restaurants popping up in and around there, and there's quite a variety.
Interesting.
Interesting to hear her say that. I think of Fishtown, where I'm familiar with. I feel like it's the opposite. You're finding a lot more, as it's gentrifying, big name chefs and restaurants and called modern American cuisine, some faster and other, that's less ethnically diverse and simplified and more reaching a larger target audience.
Interesting.
For the sake of
so maybe it depends where you are in the city, huh? Anyone else? Yes.
So one of the things for me, one of the things that drew me to Philly after being overseas was the diversity. One of the things that actually helps, though, is the Caviar app. Because you can pull,
it delivers.
Right. So so it pulls from all over the city. I mean, it'll pull from West Philadelphia, it'll pull from South Philly, it'll pull from North Philly. And it'll all come right to my doorstep. You know.
Sounds like a dream come true.
It really is, because you have Vietnamese and, you know, Italian and then Mexican, and, you know, that's how we think. But it's the impact of that app on how we eat in terms of the diversity of the food that we have available, whereas before I would have had to have actually gone to Chinatown. And now it just comes to me.
It comes to you. Yes.
The other side of that coin is that we can shop and purchase authentic ingredients. So if you're interested in learning about a cuisine and making the food authentically, you can find it.
Yeah, interesting.
There's always a place.
Yeah, lots of different places to shop and get those ingredients. Anyone else?
I'm surprised nobody said that they came to Santa Campara and had an experience.
Oh.
I have.
Oh, do we have to tell us?
I want to.
Oh, thank you. Congratulations.
I can't work out. Are these hands up to say that they've been? There you go. Or hands up to make them red. There you go.
So I would have never specifically sought out Santa Campara or like Malaysian food in general. It didn't open like down the street from me, and I was like, oh, check this out. And now like every month I'm getting the dried fish salad for breakfast, because that's like something I realize that I really like now. But if you had been like, oh, a dried fish salad, is that what you want for breakfast? You'd be like, no, why would I want that thing? And a gentleman in my neighborhood opened a specifically Laotian restaurant. I didn't know that Laotian is the appropriate way to say that even until I had gone into that restaurant. But I would have never understood that like this is different than Thai cuisine, for example, and that a lot of what we think of as Thai is just like pillaged from Laotian. This restaurant didn't open, and the owner explained to me, yeah, that's kind of what happened. So the idea that because you have everything and there's an app like maybe, or there's Amazon and you can order everything, you won't seek out things because like if you have access to everything, it's like the music thing. We have access to all the music on Spotify, and we listen to the top 50 hits more than ever. So if places open up in your neighborhood, you'll probably check them out because they're part of your neighborhood more so than like go to seek out this thing, you know, unless it gets super popular.
Interesting. So maybe the caviar app we use sometimes, but we should venture out sometimes too and check out places around us. All right, last comment, and then we're gonna move.
Santa Campara is wonderful. I highly recommend it. The fish souffle, and I don't forgive me, I don't remember the
Ota.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one that's your favorite.
Awesome. I grew up as well as my husband in Northeast Philadelphia, and that has become a real, I guess you could consider that a melting pot. You can find just about everything there, from, you know, of course, Russian, Brazilian, Portuguese,
Asian for Asian people,
right?
not American Asian.
So
It was growing up, it was a white bread world.
Absolutely.
not anymore.
Not anymore. So much better now. So much better.
Very good. Okay, well we have to move on now with our program. So what you're going to do now, on your badges, you have a letter. For those people who have the letter A on their badges, you're going to follow Susanna into the kitchen, and you are in for a culinary treat. For those of you who are with B badges, you're staying in here. You can feel free to move forward. About 7:10-ish, 7:15, we're going to switch. And the people in here, we're going to go in the kitchen. The people in the kitchen are going to come in here. So I'll see you all again soon. If you're in here, feel free to move forward. We're going to start our culinary.
Good to see you. Good to see you guys.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
Okay, so we are now going to start with our esteemed guests. We've got a few prompt questions, but I think this session is going to be fairly interactive. We encourage you to take us trips down memory lanes and things like that. We encourage you to ask some questions as well as we go along. So, and once again, this is Chef Angie and Chef Chris Paul. They are going to be answering your questions. So, I'm going to prompt them with a question and then we'll kind of go from there. So the first one relates to some of the things we were talking about earlier. In terms of authenticity, we didn't really get to that in our discussion, but a lot of people were implying authentic ingredients. So chefs, what does authentic cuisine mean to you? In other words, do you have to be from a particular culture in order to cook that culture's food?
Sure. Yeah, I think in general the word authentic to me comes down to both technique and ingredient, depending on the dish. I mean, obviously, something might be just inaccessible, overall. Prime example, we make something in Haiti called pickles, which is like a pickled cabbage. It's a slaw, spicy slaw. We kind of eat it with street food. It goes really well with everything, but we use Scotch bonnet traditionally. But the closest thing to that is habanero, so in some cases when it's literally unavailable, or if I'm ordering and it's like, hey, you have to get 20 pounds of Scotch bonnet, I'm like, I don't need 20 pounds. A lot of times I use habanero because the heat level is very familiar. So in some cases, someone Haitian might be like, that's not pickles. I'm like, it is, because I'm in this situation now. And in another instance, if I was in Haiti and I had Scotch bonnets and I went and bought habaneros, then I think it kind of go reverse. So I think the technique is the big thing. Just like certain things you're doing as far as like making spetzel or something. The process is what makes it authentic. If you make little dumplings and call it spetzel and you didn't actually feed it, then it's not authentic. So I think it really comes down to being reasonable within reason. If it's available, obviously that's your first step. But the technique is going to be what drives what happens in your flavors, if it makes sense.
For me, I want to, so just to describe authentic, I want to bring in two more words which I think is often used very interchangeably with authentic. There's authentic, traditional, and ethnic. And I think in any food writing or articles, all of these three words are used interchangeably. But to me, I think they are very, very different. So for me, before I explain what it means to me, let me just give you a little background on my culture, Malaysian food, and what it is, and then I'll use that as an example to explain it. So Malaysia is a very multicultural country. It's small. Many of you have never been there, don't even know where it is on a map. But back in the 13th century, Malaysia was actually the hub of the spice trade. This was during the Marco Polo spice trade. There were two routes. There was a northern route and a sea route. And the sea route passes this port called Port of Malacca. Malacca might be a town or a word that you might have heard before, but that port was right in the middle of the straits, and that was like a toll gate to all the spice islands on the east of the port. So in the 14th century, spice was more expensive than gold at that time. Everyone on the west wanted to sail east to look for these spices in the spice islands, and we owned and we basically, the land of nutmeg was all around that area. And if you all know, nutmeg is so expensive back then. So that brought the Spaniards, they brought the Portuguese, the Dutch, they all sailed east, and the minute they landed in Malacca, they found these spices, they got their gold, and they went home. That was also around the same era of the Ming Dynasty in China. And of course, the Chinese dynasty realized that Malacca was trading with all this West. and they had things that they wanted to trade, but nobody went all the way to China because once you find gold, why would you go look for something else? So the Ming Dynasty then sailed down to Malacca, and they brought their trade with them. So now Malacca became a hub between the East and the West. And in 1411, when the Ming Dynasty realized how important that trading relationship was for their trades, they brought like dried fishes, they brought tea, and peanuts. There was a princess from the Ming Palace that was then given to marry the Sultan of Malacca so that they can secure trading relationships. Those were the times when there was no treaty. That was the time when you gave a bride away, and that was your trading. That was the treaty. That's how you secure trading relationships. So back in those days, multicultural marriage, I mean, even today, multicultural marriage is not something common, right? But imagine in 1411 when that happened, and it was between a Chinese princess and a Malay sultan. The sultan is Muslim, and princess is Chinese, and if you know the cultural context between a pork-eating culture, a very pork-centric culture, and a non-pork-eating culture, that is big for the two of them to come together. So since that time, because of that marriage, Malaysia has set its foot on this cultural diversity that has to come together regardless. And it set the stage for a lot of other cross-cultural marriage that now, over centuries, has become norm. And growing up in Malaysia, and although we have different cultures in the country, most Malaysians might identify with one ethnicity, but at the end of the day, we are really a mix of a lot of different things because of the history. And the same goes with our food, the same goes with our flavors. So back to that question, what is authentic? When you look at Malaysian food, the food is, you would be trying a pickle. I'll use that as an example. That's going to be at the topping of one of the hummus dishes. That pickle is authentic to Malaysia because that's where it was created. And I think authentic food is authentic to whoever creates it. However, the traditions of that pickle stems from 3 different cultures. There is the first part of making that pickle, which you'll be trying, comes from the tradition of Chinese quick pickles, which are brought by the Chinese people in the way of fermenting and curing, and that's a very big culture in China, and also Chinese influenced countries like Japan and Korea, right? Stems from that. The art of making the sambal, which is the second layer in the pickle, comes from the Indian tradition of making sambal, and putting it together and using the local ingredients like gingers, which are local to Malaysia, makes the end dish authentic to Malaysia, but yet it comes from different traditions that brings it together. So that to me is the big difference. And of course, ethnicity is a whole different discussion. I find that we use the word ethnicity way too loosely, because when I say that I'm cooking my ethnic food, it means that it's a food that belongs to me. I grew up with it. And like the lady was mentioning earlier when she was talking about her recipe, she could make it without a recipe. That is what I consider ethnic food. Because you own it, you grew up with it, you don't need a recipe to make that. You have it in your palate to make it. And that's the difference to me. So as a chef, when I say I want to cook somebody else's cuisine, I can never cook somebody else's ethnic cuisine. Never, because I don't own it. But I can learn to cook a traditional cuisine. But that requires me to study it. And whatever I create is authentic to what I create. And that's how I see the difference. Does it make sense?
Okay. Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Let's go on to another question. That's very interesting to me. I love the dissection of ethnicity and authenticity. Very interesting. Okay, so maybe building off this a bit. What have you found to be the best way to learn how to prepare food from a culture that you're not really familiar with? So you've touched on it a little bit about adopting and learning, but how personally in your journey as chefs have you improved the skills to cook outside of the cuisine that maybe, like you said, is your ethnic cuisine?
I think, with cooking, it's synonymous to eating, so I think essentially, whether, you read a recipe 100 times, if you ate it 100 times, depending on your training and your skill level, it's easier for me to dissect something from having tasting it or having had those flavors before. So I think anything, like right now, actually, my wife is from Trinidad, so her, although we're both in the Caribbean, I'm originally from Haiti, we cook very different because our history is very different. We've sort of broke away from French, which is our main influence in food since late 1700s, whereas Trinidad has sort of had the Indian influence, the British influence, as well as some Asian influence as well. So there's a lot of curries. There's a lot of flavors that in Haiti we rarely use. I mean, even turmeric and some of those spices are not even in our cuisine. The closest we would get to is nutmeg, and I think that's probably an introduction that came on later on, paired with chocolate and other things. But what I found is that when her mom makes certain things, some of the dishes that might sound peculiar, like pickled mangoes and certain flavors that to me, mangoes we always just eat raw. Where like my wife has a palate for sourness and the bitterness. I'm like, I don't want that. I want it to be ripe. I want it to be ready, which was one of the biggest shell shocks of coming here when someone asked me if I wanted a mango, and like, what do you mean? We have like 100 mangoes. You would say like mango ali, mango flasik, and they were just like, oh, mango. What do you mean a mango? Like, which one? And then, sad to say, I found those big green things they have in the grocery store. That's like, we call them mangoes, but essentially, so going back to the question is, you have to taste it. So as my mother-in-law makes certain dishes, she could explain it to me, but if you were to explain it over and over and I didn't taste it to me, I'm blinded. I have to taste it, and I'll be able to see the different textures, different acidity level, even with bread when you get into baking, just biting and ripping, I could tell, like, not to the pinpoint, but I could tell, okay, is there yeast in this? Is there baking soda? Is it fried? Is it leaven? Is it proof? So to cook is to eat. So for me, I think eating it is the best way to really dissect what's happening and what's going on.
Chef Angie?
To me, I found the best way to learn about food from a different culture is really to cook it with a person who comes from a culture. And here's why. Because cooking and culture, food and culture are intertwined, and yet it's so different, right? When you want to cook something, we live in this world of information. You can find a recipe for almost any cuisine from any part of the world. And anyone could look for a recipe and say, I know how to make this, or I know how to make rendang, and I know how to make nasi lemak. You could do that because that information is available to you to do that. But when you're cooking with culture, is a whole different thing, because as even though you could find a recipe for rendang, the whole culture of making rendang. Rendang, by the way, is beef that is stewed in coconut cream. It's one of Malaysia's national dishes. It's beef that is stewed in coconut cream forever. And it's absolutely delicious. It's a little spicy, but it's just, imagine your beef stew, but it's enriched with coconut cream in it. So, so you could find that recipe anywhere, and you could make it yourself or try and attempt to make it yourself. But if you grew up Malaysian and you think about how rendang is made, and you are part of the process of making rendang with a Malaysian, the story, the process dates back to the days before refrigeration in Malaysia, where you have to slaughter a whole cow to feed a village. And the only way to preserve meat in a hot and humid country is to cook it. And if you have to feed a village over a festival or wedding that lasts a week, you cook it for a week over coconut shell charcoal on this low fire, just to keep it going and not let it spoil. And for Malaysians, rendang could come in different forms. In the first day of the festival, the rendang could be more like a stew that's nice and juicy with a lot more cream in it. And the last day of the festival, you get this dry rendang jerky, which is called rendang tok because it's been cooking for 7 days. And it's all called rendang, and it's all perfectly acceptable variations of rendang, but the whole culture of it and how we partake of it is something that the recipe would not provide you. And it's something that you can only learn when you are with the person who came with the culture. So I feel like, you know, if I really want to learn food of another culture, I do need to spend time with the person who grew up in that. And I had a really nice experience recently in one of my events where I actually have a non-profit pop-up that I do called Muhibat Dinners, and I invite chefs from multiple cultures and race in Philly to cook a dinner. The word Muhibat in my language means people of multiple cultures and race coming together, peace and tolerance. And it's amazing that my language actually has one word that describes that, but I think the history speaks for itself, you know, how we came about as a nation. But I love those pop-up dinners. We raise money during those dinners, and we donate all the proceeds to nonprofits that work with immigrants and refugees and nationality services, Highest Pennsylvania, and places like that. But the reason I brought that up is because the last event that happened a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to work with Kenny, who is the chef at Bistro La Minette, and he made this dish called Hopping Johns. I've read about it. I know it is very typical Southern American, and I have had not so good versions of it until I spent time with Kenny and tasted his Hopping Johns, and I was like, damn, this is delicious. How do you make rice so delicious, and how do you make beans so delicious? And he walked me through the whole history of rice and beans that he grew up with, where the rice would be milled the same day that you cook it. And that makes a huge difference in flavor. And my ethnicity is Chinese. I thought I know rice. Until I actually but I never tasted rice that was milled the same day that it was actually cooked. And it was a world of a difference. And the story behind it, with the beans, the heritage beans, is something that I've tried recipes for that, but I just never knew that there were certain cultural things that are so significant to make that dish actually authentic.
Interesting. So it seems to me that food is not only sustenance and not only ways to connect, but it's a history. And it's so much more than just the satisfying nature of eating food, that listening to mangoes and listening to the stories in the Caribbean about the different immigrant groups and different people who have lived there, listening to the great history of Malaysia and all the intertwining things that it may sound cliche, but in fact perhaps food does tell a story and is a history and is so much more than just food. That's so fascinating. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that so far? Feel free to chime in and just put your hand up as we have questions.
So, well, not direct but indirect. We have this old Jewish cookbook. It's probably about 120 years old, and it's got all these recipes that, unless you've got someone who knows how to make the dish cooking with you, you could never follow the recipe.
Right.
You know, it's a handful of this, and cook it until it's done. And now with so much information, you can cook alone, but you lose, like you said, cooking with someone who really knows the food, the ethnic parts, the traditions, which, you know, the old cookbooks, you couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it. Still couldn't do it now. Not in my kitchen. Because, I mean, I love that cookbook, and I actually love that cookbook has, the, you know, those kind of measurements, right? Because back in the days, before the time of internet, the way recipes were passed down was when you spent time with your grandmother in the kitchen. That was the only way. And I think a lot of international cuisines are still that way. And so in my kitchen, lots of chefs come back to my kitchen and they think that after a week of writing down all my recipes that they can actually make a sambal. There were so many incidents when I would make a sambal with a chef and he thought, all right, I got it done. But the next time he tries to make it himself without me next to it, I would taste the sambal and I would say, no, you didn't cook the shallots enough. And I'm like, how the hell do you know that? Like, what? That's not in your recipe that you have to cook the shallots enough. But when you grow up with a technique and you can smell a particular smell in the shallots once it's done enough, you know it. And like you say, you know, cooking is, you cook with all your five senses. The nose is one of the very important senses too, especially when we use spice. Tempering the spices is one of the most important steps in Malaysian sambal making. And how do you know when spices are tempered? You can't get that in a recipe book. There is no smell in a recipe book that tells you that once you get this smell, it means your spices is tempered enough. You have to be in front of the stove long enough with your grandmother telling you, that's the smell. It's ready. So it's, you know, you're right. I mean, there's no other way to learn.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking so much of what you do is a craft, and in all crafts, if you want to reach a level of expertise, you have to experience them. So if you're a carpenter, an artist, when the person who's expert tells you it's done because it's done, you only can do that through time and experience. So what I'm wondering, and I'm getting back, I think it was the lady over here that said about her children losing the habit of doing the preparation. So my question is, what do we lose, and how, or better yet, how can we retain all of the history, all of that other aspect of what you just described about food for next generations? Because if all we do is open a bag or go to a store and get something pre-bought, we not only have we lost the tradition of the food preparation, but all of the history and all the culture that goes along with it. So I guess our question, what can we do to inculcate that and to continue that tradition? Because once it's lost, it's lost.
Yeah. Use less caviar. You know,
yeah.
take it back to the kitchen. You know, I think it's very convenient to just open something like you mentioned, even with the collards, they have bags where it's already cleaned, and there's all these processes that you know, you wonder, what if there's a collard shortage and now you go to a farmer's and it's just a stalk and you're like, what do I do with this? You know, so I think, I mean, it's all our jobs essentially to just have dinner at home periodically and actually make it. you know,
Yeah.
like not from like a kit or something weird, just like actual raw products to a finished product. And you're right, I think it is getting lost. And yeah, so I don't know how, but I would just say maybe tonight, you know, not tonight, would be like maybe tomorrow. Try to prep something and pass on something that you remember.
I wonder if bringing it back in school, back to school would be a good way for the next generation, especially to reintroduce just cooking in general. And you know, U.S. is so diverse. It's not, nowadays it's not just introducing American cooking, you can introduce so many different ethnic cooking. And you know, making a sauce, French style versus Malaysian style versus Haitian style, it's all different techniques. And just reintroducing that in schools.
Just wanted to express when you were talking about the grandparents teaching the kids to cook. My best friend's dad actually taught me how to make pizza from scratch. He was first generation Italian. And the whole thing about you can smell when it's ready.
Yeah.
You know, when it's baked to a certain point when it's just ready. He used to measure with, you know, he was like, oh, you just put in this much yeast. You know, and it wasn't until I got married to her that I had to actually measure things. And, oh, you just use this. You know. But that was a great memory.
Those are the times when, our parents just never measured anything, but they have measurements. But the measurements are different. It's not a metric system. My mom used to have a cup, and she would always use that same cup to measure. So I would not do her justice when I say that she can't be consistent because she doesn't measure. She does, because if she loses that cup, forget about it. She has to find that cup.
Right. So I work with a cultural group that's now, you know, 4 generations in America. And the whole sense of losing the culture and then getting it back, I think, is a normal cycle, especially in this country, where, you know, the first generation has it, their kids kind of reject it, lose it, and then in the 3rd and 4th generation, you want to find it again. And that's where you either find people that you can connect with and learn from, or organizations that are trying to keep culture alive, whether it's dance or language or food, and you can then learn your own culture, not through the family line, but sort of sideways from other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that gap in culture a little bit, because growing up in Malaysia, I'm actually the 5th generation ethnic Chinese in Malaysia. So I'm more Malaysian than I'm Chinese, even though I look like I am Chinese. Because culturally, this is really weird. My family has very strong traditional rules. So they escaped China even way before the revolution in China. So they had this really old-fashioned culture that they kept with them because they were so afraid of losing their identity, that they made sure that every single generation, learned these traditional cultures like the art of tea pouring. And mind you, I'm the 5th generation, and as a kid, I had to learn the art of tea pouring. And I had to do that. All the kids had to do that for Chinese New Year. We had to do that for our elders. We had to do that for a wedding. And it was something that I thought that every Chinese person would know. Until I left the country and I met another Chinese person from China, and I was talking about this Chinese New Year tradition where I have to pour tea for my family. And this person from China said, "What? What do you do?" Like, that is so old-fashioned. Like, why do you even do that? That's like my great-grandmother's time. And for me, it was not, I mean, China has progressed, and it wasn't something that they practiced anymore, and it was considered old-fashioned, but it was something that, growing up in Malaysia as a Chinese, it was something that we had to do to retain our identity. So it's really different that way, and I'm sure a lot of communities here have something similar.
Okay, all right. I like this question. I'm sure everyone wants to know the answer to this one. On your day off, what kind of food do you prepare for yourself? Is it the same cuisine as the kind of food you prepare professionally, or do you have something completely different?
Usually completely different. I think the main reason I started cooking, it's fun, ironically, was because I used to hate Asian cooking. Just because of, similar to what you said, you know, I think we're about seven generations Haitian that we can trace back to about the Revolutionary War. And my grandfather was very, you know, very strict, like even like put your elbows on the table. Like the last time I licked the bowl, like I'm like scared to still lick the bowl now from like being a kid. And I think everything was, you know, very proper and in a way, sort of copying French colonial style a little bit, but also within some of our own traditions. And so we had our routine, you know, so Sundays was, this is what we eat on Sunday. There was the beet salad, there was like the rice and beans, then we had fish. Wednesday it was just sort of like, so I grew up in Haiti till about 10, and you know, from as early as I can remember, from about 4 to 10, weeks were like, I could predict, like, oh, okay, it's January 1st, let's get ready for soup, and it became reoccurring. And you know, when we came here, my mom did sort of the same thing, because that's what she was passed on to. So when we came here, I was like, oh, it's going to be different. We'll have pizza this time. It's like, no, we're going to have this, and we're going to have that. And right around 12, you know, when we went shopping, I always sort of had like some sort of entrepreneur thing going on. I used to like sweep up barbershop to make extra money, and we would go shopping, and I would have my own car, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting this time. And I started off with like box things and improvising, so I got mac and cheese in a box, and instead of putting water, I put milk. Then I put like something else. Then I kept adding layers till now it's like, all right, I'm gonna make my own pasta and get fancy. But essentially, I don't like eating the same thing. So leftovers are like my pet peeve, and because of that background, I always want something different besides like, I'll eat bacon all the time, and you know, the basics, like I'll eat scrap, anything pork, I'll eat that all the time, and sushi, some of those things. But it's like, if I eat a burger today, and even if it was the most amazing burger, I can't eat it later on, I can't eat it tomorrow. So I try to do something completely different from what I'm cooking. So like right now, because Noma just came out with the book of fermentation, and I got it, so it's like, it's the new thing. I'm on like my 5th batch of kombucha. I have like these used Kobe's in my house. I just got some tempeh cultures, because my buddy was like, hey, you know, you can make tempeh without soybean. What? So I'm working on like a black bean and sesame tempeh, and I like things that are complicated and hard. It's like, if it's like, hey, it's gonna take like 7 days, 1 outside, 2 inside, and then 3 more months, I'm like, all right, that's what I want to do. So I try to like, because if it's easy, then it's like, you know, what's the point? It's like, I could have just made that in a heartbeat. So I sort of have like projects where like I have vinegar from like 2 months ago, then I have like this other thing, then next month I'm gonna take that vinegar, I'm gonna take this tempeh, I'm going to take this kombucha and like make something else. And in relation to that, one thing that's carried over is gardening, and that's one thing Susanna mentioned. I have a pretty decent seed collection, over like 120 seeds, and a lot of them actually are some from my grandma, and she's like 88 now, and she just wakes up and gardens, and every time I go back to Haiti, I sort of bring things back. I recently grew her corn, which was completely different. Like our corn gets to about 5 feet. I grew it in West Philly, it was like 12. Wow. But way less corn, so I was like, oh great, this looks nice, but I had like 1 ear. So yeah, I try to go back to essentially things that are complicated and connecting it with whatever weird connection I could get. You know, if I could say like, oh, I knew that farmer, I got these apples from him, now I mashed it, I made apple cider, then I made apple cider vinegar. Then now I'm making like apple cider candies. It's like, I really like to delve into one ingredient and then just dragging it along. Like, how long can I hold this until it turns into like a bacteria that's like harmful. And then when it's not, okay, I'll eat it, you know. So yeah, I had like lamb shanks hanging for like 2 months. That it didn't work out, but goat jerky worked out. So it all depends. I like the weird stuff and
What about you, Stefan?
Well, Chris is way more hardworking than I am. That's work. When he's describing another day off for me. On my day off, I love one-pot meals. Anything that I can cook in one pot, I would do, whether it's my ethnic food or somebody else's ethnic food. That's my favorite day off things. One pot, one on the stove, one in the oven. So last week I made charcuterie, which is, I love that one pot meal. I mean, what's better than sauerkraut and lots of pork and sausages, and then stuff it in the oven for a couple of hours, and then
intestines and stomach.
I would love to add that. I held myself back because I was learning how to make charcuterie. Well, I did with trotters. I think trotters would go well in it. But
You really do know.
one pot meals. If anybody has any one pot meals, their favorite one pot meals to share, I would make it my day off activity.
So you're completely opposite. Yeah. You're completely opposite in terms of what you like to do. You like the long game, and you like the let's get one pot in and so I guess that chefs vary in terms of what they like to do in their day off. Okay, so we're wrapping up. We've got about another 5 minutes before we're going to swap and go into the kitchen. So I think this is a nice one to end on. If you could let the audience know one thing that you wish they knew about your work in the food industry, what would it be?
For me, it would be the Muhiba dinners. So, everybody knows me as the chef and owner of Sati Kampar, and it's pretty well written up in the Inquirer and a lot of different articles. We were nominated for James Beard. But if you ask me, the thing that I'm most happy and proud of is the nonprofit, the charity dinner that we started. The Muhiba dinners is so amazing. I love it every time. It's a pop-up that happens about 3 to 4 times a year. And when we started, so I started the dinner last year during Immigrant Heritage Month. Maybe as my response to everything that immigrants are going through right now. And everything that the nonprofit who works with refugees and immigrants are going through with lack of funding and still supporting the city as a very welcoming sanctuary city. And also working in a restaurant with such a diverse employee from, we have at least 12 different languages in my kitchen. And English is not the first language to most. In my past career before I opened a restaurant, I was usually the token Asian person in my career. But in my kitchen, we have token white guy. So everyone else comes from a different place, and food is one thing that connects everybody. So this Muhiba dinner that we do, it's a good challenge for chefs because every chef is challenged with not to cook the food that they cook in your restaurant every day, but to cook one dish that speaks of their heritage and speaks of where they come from. And quite often, as chefs, we cook one way for the restaurant, but at home, the way we cook for our families, the way we cook for kids, it's completely different. And the beauty of the dinner is that you get to taste those food that the chefs would cook for their kids and their family, which you just cannot buy that experience. So that's something that I wish people knew more about. And for those of you who want to read more, go to the website muhibadinners.org and sign up for it, because when we have our next dinner, we would send emails out to everyone, and you should come and experience one. It's really amazing.
That's amazing. And Chef Chris,
Yeah,
what's the one thing you wish people knew?
Yeah, on the same token, I feel like it is the nonprofit work that's always more fulfilling. Last year I had a restaurant that we closed down in New City, and I transferred into, now we have a food truck. Me and my wife, we do a bunch of catering, teach like ServSafe, and truthfully, I do like 12 things and I hate like 11 of them. Like, I don't actually want to teach sanitation and talk about it for 8 hours. The food truck is kind of like, I always think it's like the punishment from a restaurant, because it's always double work, you know, so you're loading and unloading. No matter what you do, it's like if it's an 8-hour day, call it a 12-hour day. So that's one thing I'm still figuring out. And then, you know, with catering, it's sort of one of those things like, I have this idea, I sent you this menu, and then you just want like pigs in a blanket. And it's like, all right, you're paying for it, I'll start rolling. So all of those things that are like for-profit always fall short compared to, you know, the work. A lot of the dinners that, you know, I haven't been part of that yet, but we've been doing the Cooking for the Culture series, and that just came about, and as well as a Right to Work dinner with South Philly Barbacoa. And it is, besides, you know, just doing it for the right cause, it's always cool just like, we're in the kitchen, there's like a bunch of chefs, we've never met each other, and all of a sudden we're all cooking, we're all plating, and we're all just on the same page, and I think it's very fulfilling just to learn, interact, and you know, just taste different flavors, whereas, you know, I could have made X amount of dollars making pigs in a blanket, but I would way rather do something that I think on the end, I would rather people not know me as the guy that makes like really good pigs in a blanket, you know, it's like a little less, a little more disappointing, so.
Okay. Well, I'd like the audience to thank our CEO.
Grew up here in the States, in the suburbs, grew up eating hummus as this thing that sort of took over for Jewish food at some point. And it wasn't even, and then later on I'd go to find out that we didn't even get good hummus. It was just like, we got hummus without tahina, which is like weird, because hummus means chickpea, and we got just straight chickpea, but once you have the addition of tahina, then you realize like, the truth is that you can take all the chickpeas out and have just tahina mixed with water and lemon juice, and it's like pure heaven. And then you can have just chickpeas like pureed, and it's like, why would, like, who hates me? Yeah, so then, you know, I moved to Israel and started eating hummus, like real hummus, and it was like, you know, this awesome, like, just thing that you always had. It was everywhere, like really everywhere, and then you start learning about all these like other things, like, you know, that there's this weird like sort of political side of it, where you have like these like lefty Israelis who go to like Israeli Arab villages on Saturdays to like prove that they're like, you know, like they have Arab friends, which are the server, or that, you know, this is, and then, but you go in and it's like, you know, the adage of you go to a restaurant with like, you know, ethnic cuisine, and if everyone in there is like white, then you know, like, all right, well, maybe this isn't the real deal. And it's like that. You have like Arab servers, and then all these like white Israeli, you know, patrons. And then you start to discover that there's even like, you know, other levels and layers to it. And then there's multiple types of hummus. You get hummus that's like super gritty and lemony, and you get hummus that's creamy and smooth, and all these like different variations on it. You can get Jordanian hummus, Lebanese hummus, Palestinian hummus, Israeli hummus. And then, you know, one of the interesting things, like in Israel and Tel Aviv, there was this spot called, I think, Paradise. Do you guys remember this place in Tel Aviv? Is that where you're from? You are from Paradise, right? On like down from on Allenby, I think. Like it was like owned by these like Sudanese refugees. Like the place was like hugely popular. Really sad story. The refugee like finally like went back to Sudan and was killed in like a car crash like a month later. But he ran this like amazing hummus place for like a few years, and it was like a complete anomaly within the landscape of hummus, because you have like all these like traditional things, and then there's this like, you know, black African dude making hummus, and like, but not like African hummus, like, you know, Israeli hummus. And then, you know, there'd be in the news like hummus wars between Israel and Lebanon, and like there'd be backhoes and like, you know, construction equipment, like plating these giant like swooshes of hummus on plates, and you're like, this is utterly ridiculous, but like much more endearing than the other forms of combative relationships. So I never really made hummus in Israel, though. Like, I never had to. And then when I got back to the States, I mean, in the same way, I never really made things like mac and cheese or, I mean, buffalo wings when I lived in the States until I got to Israel and was like, oh, yeah, I need to make some of this stuff. So now I get back to the States and it's like, oh, I need to make this now. So I started making it, and I don't know, I sort of make it to my taste. I like to, and you'll get like all sorts of different opinions on every last little bit. This is rooted in the Middle East and the Balkans, so like you can have opinions like you don't know. And so I cook my chickpeas like I would if I was actually going to eat the chickpeas. Like I don't blow them out in the water or anything like that. I don't put anything in my hummus other than chickpea, tahina, lemon and salt, and then the cooking liquids as well. I don't use any spice, nothing along those lines. Anything that I ever want to have with my hummus, it goes on top of it. I'm a bit of a purist in this respect, I guess. I like the taste of chickpeas, and I especially like the taste of tahina. So the hummus situation came about with making hummus and pop-ups, and realizing like I don't want to just be like another guy making hummus in this town. We have a disproportionate amount of people making hummus in this town, and basically I decided that I would change the format. That I wasn't like I didn't feel comfortable like selling this product that I really just make out of like my love of it to do things like pay the rent or whatever. So I teamed up with a buddy of mine to start this thing called the Hummus Situation, where the idea was I would make hummus and pita, and then I would invite a friend who generally is a chef with an activist cause. We would change the format to pay as you feel, and all the proceeds would go towards this cause of the guest chef. The first one I did was with my buddy Kurt Evans, who, if you're not aware of this guy, you should be. He's like...
And he's going to be teaching a few classes here next year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's in Portland right now.
He's not messing
with
around.
he was like flown out to Portland to like participate in some like huge culinary event with another like great black chef in Philadelphia, this dude Elijah Milligan, I think his name. And we raised money for Book 3 Bars. The second one we did was with Amanda Pfeiffer. Raised money for Mighty Writers. This is obviously a slightly different format, but my proceeds from this are going back to the library. It sort of allows hummus to become like this passion project that I get to continue to make it and continue to share because, I mean, that's the point of this. And then I get to do it with friends, and they get to do things like bring their achot pickles from Satay Kampar and put it on hummus because that's not a thing that normally happens. Or Chris made his homemade tempeh and marinated in jerk seasoning, and that's like not a normal thing that goes on hummus. And all of a sudden we get these things. Kurt, by the way, killed it with these like, oh my god. I was like in awe of what he made. Jerk black eyed peas with collard green pesto, and it was like awe-inspiring. Where I was like, this is the smartest thing I've ever seen. It's delicious. It was beautiful on hummus. It was like, I mean, almost. It was like we've been having this for like generations. It felt like, Anyway, so I think what's going to be fun is to get our hands a little dirty with obviously cleaning them first. But we're going to make some pita, and then we're going to plate our own hummus and work on our swoosh.